At noon on April 18, 1942, Tokyo, Japan was sunny and beautiful. The radio played cheerful music. Pedestrians walked leisurely by the roadside. Everything was as usual in the streets and alleys. For the Japanese, this was just another ordinary spring day. But they didn't know that a threat had fallen from the sky. A roar broke the tranquility of the city. People looked up and saw several strange planes flying across the sky, but those were not Japanese planes. They were American B-25 bombers. Then bombs rained down. Explosions tore through the sky over the city. Flames, smoke, and screams rose and fell in Tokyo Bay. Air raid sirens were late. The military was caught off guard. The U.S. planes didn't stay long. After completing their bombing mission, they flew directly southwest and landed in Zhejiang Province, China. This was the first time in history that the Japanese mainland was air-raided and bombed, causing a huge psychological shock to the Japanese military and people, and not only brought the first fires of war to Tokyo, but also indirectly promoted the outbreak of the Battle of Midway. This was the famous DoLittle Raid. After the Pearl Harbor incident, the Pacific War broke out in full. The United States officially joined World War II. Although the entire U.S. was furious, the reality was extremely grim. Although the U.S. had a strong military industry, it had not yet completed full wartime mobilization and was not capable of immediately counterattacking the Japanese mainland. At this time, Japan firmly controlled the initiative in the Pacific Theater. From December 1941 to the spring of 1942, Japan advanced almost all the way. Within a few weeks, Japan occupied Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, Guam, and Wake Island, and even defeated the U.S. forces in the Philippines. MacArthur had to retreat to Australia, leaving behind his famous quote, "I shall return." The Pearl Harbor incident not only destroyed the pride of the U.S. Navy, but also severely damaged the confidence of the entire nation. The public was shocked and panicked, and once doubted whether the government was capable of defending the security of the homeland. Public opinion in the U.S. began to raise a lot of doubts. Can our army really do it? Can we really win this war? Roosevelt and senior military officials realized that they urgently needed a symbolic victory to boost morale and inspire the public's will to resist. And this victory had to be a heavy blow to the enemy's face. We want the Japanese to taste being beaten. This sentence, spoken at a White House war meeting, became the starting point of the entire plan. The U.S. military decided to carry out an air raid on the Japanese mainland. Even if it was just a symbolic bombing, they wanted the Japanese to understand that they were not safe and that the flames of war could reach their doorstep at any time. But this plan was met with controversy as soon as it was proposed, because at that time, the U.S. simply did not have the means to take off from existing bases and directly bomb the Japanese mainland. The vastness of the Pacific Theater was beyond imagination. Japan was more than 8,000 kilometers from the U.S. West Coast. Even if they took off from Hawaii, the nearest frontline base, bombers could not make a round trip. Army Air Force bombers had a long range but needed airports on land for takeoff and landing. For the Navy, carrier-based aircraft were the only platform that could send planes to Japan's doorstep. But carrier-based aircraft had a limited range, and their bomb-carrying capacity was even worse, making it impossible to effectively bomb cities like Tokyo. So, a crazy idea was put forward. Could Navy carriers carry Army bombers to take off? In conventional understanding, this was simply a fantasy, because Army bombers were huge, required a long takeoff distance, and the aircraft carrier's flight deck could not meet the takeoff needs of such aircraft. But this bold idea soon attracted one person. At that time, Lieutenant Colonel James DoLittle of the Air Force. DoLittle was not an ordinary officer. He was a legendary figure in American aviation. Born in 1996, He participated in World War I and was one of the pioneers of American aviation. DoLittle received a PhD in aeronautical engineering and was the first pilot to complete a full blind landing. In the aviation world, he was a tough guy who dared to think and act with strong organizational skills and practical experience. After hearing about the plan to bomb Tokyo, DoLittle volunteered. He not only wanted to design the plan, but also wanted to personally lead the mission. He proposed using the Army Air Force's B-25 Mitchell medium bombers, modified to shorten their takeoff distance and load these planes onto aircraft carriers, take off from an area about 800 nautical miles east of Japan, carry out air raids on Tokyo and surrounding cities. After completing the bombing mission, fly to the nearest Chinese coast and land in friendly controlled areas. Although it sounded feasible, this plan was extremely risky. It could even be called a one-way gamble. First, the B-25's takeoff distance on a normal runway exceeded 400 meters, while the carrier deck was only over 200 meters, making takeoff very difficult. Second, after the bombing was completed, they needed to fly over the Japanese mainland and the East Coast Sea, pass through enemy-controlled airspace, and then land or parachute in remote areas. Any mistake in any link could lead to mission failure or even the sacrifice of all personnel. Faced with these difficulties, DoLittle only said one sentence: "If this can boost the morale of the American people, then it's worth a try." This sentence moved President Roosevelt and also moved the U.S. military high command, and finally approved the operation. To complete the mission of taking off from an aircraft carrier, DoLittle's first step was to train a team that could do this. He first recruited hundreds of volunteers. These people must meet the following conditions: excellent technical skills, extremely strong psychological quality, willing to keep secrets, and prepared for possible sacrifice. DoLittle personally selected 80 elite pilots from them to participate in the operation. This small team was secretly sent to an airbase in Florida. The core of the training was only one thing: to complete a full load takeoff in a very short distance. For this, they drew runways on the ground that were the same length as an aircraft carrier and practiced repeatedly. Pilots gradually learned to use maximum throttle, lift control, lightweight load, and other methods to get the plane into the air within the extreme distance. In addition to taking off, they also had to learn ultra-low altitude flight to avoid radar, emergency parachuting and forced landing, and to recognize the terrain and topography of the mountains in South China to cope with unknown risks on the return route. Simultaneously, the 16 B-25 bombers participating in the air raid also went through a series of modifications. First, the tail and lower gun turrets were removed to reduce weight. Second, auxiliary field tanks were added to increase the range to more than 2,500 kilometers. Third, 4 500-pound bombs were equipped, including incendiary bombs and high-explosive bombs. Fourth, the fake machine gun muzzles were painted black with broomsticks to camouflage them and deter enemy pursuit. After intense preparations, on April 2, 1942, the USS Hornet aircraft carrier, carrying 16 B-25s, quietly sailed out of San Francisco Bay and headed for the Western Pacific. In the history of the U.S. Navy, this was the first time that non-carrier-based aircraft were loaded onto an aircraft carrier. The entire flight deck of the carrier was crowded with these large aircraft, and the carrier-based aircraft had no place to park and had to be temporarily transferred. DoLittle and his comrades were full of ambition and confidence, eager to fly to Japan's doorstep and directly slap Tokyo. Another famous aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, sailed with the Hornet. The Enterprise did not participate in the mission of carrying bombers. Its mission was to escort the Hornet, ensuring that the entire fleet safely approached Japan. The fleet's goal was to sail to about 800 kilometers south of Japan's east coast, allowing the 25 bombers to take off from the deck. But plans are often interrupted by unforeseen events. At 7:38 a.m. on April 18th, about 1,200 kilometers from the Japanese coast, U.S. ships encountered a Japanese patrol boat in the area. Although the U.S. cruiser quickly sunk it, the fleet intercepted the Japanese radio warning that had already been sent, and the Japanese side might have already learned of the existence of the U.S. fleet. Faced with the sudden exposure, the U.S. military had to make a decision immediately: terminate the operation in return, or take off early and forcibly execute the mission. Undoubtedly, DoLittle chose the second option. What did this mean? It meant that the B-25s would take off from a place farther than expected, and the subsequent fuel for flying to China would be even tighter, even possibly running out of fuel during the flight. It also meant that the original night bombing would be changed to daytime flight, exposing the targets completely and greatly increasing the risk of encountering enemy fighters and anti-aircraft guns. In any case, this mission became even more dangerous. At 8:20 a.m., the roar of engines came from the deck of the USS Hornet aircraft carrier. DoLittle's first B-25, slipping to the front edge of the deck, took off from the carrier in one go, and then 15 other planes also took off. This scene became the first in world aviation history: medium bombers taking off from an aircraft carrier deck and attacking an enemy country thousands of kilometers away. At that time, the Japanese military did not anticipate that the United States would carry out air raids on their homeland, so the major cities on the Japanese mainland were completely unprepared. Everyone might be wondering, didn't a Japanese patrol boat just encounter the U.S. fleet and send out a radio warning? Why didn't the Japanese mainland make defensive preparations? There were 3 reasons.